In early America, there were very few books in private homes. Therefore, not much need for bookcases. But here at the bank, they kept the books, right?
Right, they're in there.
I bet they knew where every nickel and dime was. This is a nice piece, a freestanding bookcase with a cornice detail at the top. And inside, an adjustable shelf feature. You thought that was a modern device. It appears that the cabinet is built from some pine, but if you look at the inside of the door, you see that it's pine on the inside and that it has a mahogany veneer on the outside. So I suppose today we would build a bookcase like this with plywood. Now, to build my bookcase today, I need 2.5 sheets of plywood, 1.5 sheets of 3/4 inch for the sides, the top, and the bottom, as well as the shelves, and 1 sheet of 1/4 inch for the back. Now, I've chosen birch plywood because the plywood is much more stable than a solid wood might be. I'm not going to get any warping or splitting. And I've chosen this birch because it's a nice smooth surface. It'll paint up nicely, and you could stain it, in fact, if you wanted to. Now, it's expensive, but not as expensive as good premium pine might be. Now, my home center doesn't offer pre-cutting of plywood, but some places do. You might want to have them make the initial cuts for you right at the lumberyard. That'll save you some time, but make sure they do it right because this stuff is still fairly expensive. Now, I'm going to cut mine on my table saw here, and I've set the fence up so that it's 24 inches from the rip fence to the center of the blade. That way I'll get 2 equally wide strips 8 feet long. And because I'm doing it alone, I need a little bit of help, so I put these rollers in front of the saw. And they're set up so that they're just a little bit lower than the top of the table saw, and they're also perfectly parallel with the front of the saw. If they were out of parallel, as you push the wood through, it might tend to walk off in one direction or the other. So with those all set up, I'm ready to go. Wish me luck. Now, another thing is that in my shop here I have my workbench behind the saw, and it's about the same height as the saw, so it helps hold up the plywood. And what you want to do is make sure that the plywood is tight up against the fence and not out at an angle like this or like this. The idea is to keep it perfectly parallel to the fence. Keep an eye on that as well as the blade, and just take your time and push it through. All right, this is 1 sheet that's been ripped in half, and now I need 1 more half sheet, so I'll rip this one over here. And you know, if you don't have a table saw that rips to 24-inch widths, and you can't get your lumberyard to make the initial cuts for you, you could think about using a straight edge and just an ordinary circular saw. You can do a pretty good job with that, but this is really the way to go. So now I need 2 pieces, 11 3/4 inches, for the sides of the bookcase. And I'll set my rip fence, again making sure to get an accurate measurement between the fence and the saw blade. And I'll rip those 2 pieces from one of my half sheets. Now for my shelves. As you can see, the shelf is just a piece of plywood with a pine nosing. And I need to rip the plywood to 10.5 inches. Let's see, if I rip 3 strips 8 feet long, that'll give me enough material for 6 shelves. Reset my saw to 10.5. Now, the next piece that I need is this bottom stationary piece. And you'll notice that it's wider than either the sides or the adjustable shelves. And in fact, it needs to be 12 1/8 inches. And I'll cut that from my remaining strip here, but first I want to cross-cut it in half, which will be 4 feet. Okay, now I'm going to rip it on the table saw, which is already set at 12 1/8. Now I need a piece for the top up here, and that fits between the plywood on the back and the face frame. So it needs to be 11 3/8 inches. And I'll cut that from my remaining strip over here. This part of the operation is cutting to length. And this is one of 2 side pieces cut to 6'5" 3/8. This will be the top, which is cut to 3 feet. This will be our bottom, cut to 2 foot 11 1/4 inches. And while I'm at it, I might as well cut my shelves, which will be 34 3/8 inches. With these scrap pieces, I can show you how we join the bottom to the sides. We'll cut a dado in the side pieces, into which we'll just slip our bottom. And that's just a regular dado joint, which is a very strong connection, and we'll do that right over on the table saw. Now to do this joint, I'm using a dado head, which I've set to take out a 3/4 inch wide by 3/8 inch deep dado, and it's just 2 blades that are set at angles to one another. And I'm going to use my T-square in combination with my rib fence, which is something you should never do unless you have this guide block in place. Without the guide block, you stand the chance of bind up and possible kickback of the wood as you push it through. The guide block is just a reference so that my dado will end up in the right place. In this case, from the bottom of the side piece to the top of the dado is 5 inches. So as I push it through, it starts me in the right place, but it also gives me clearance here so that I don't have any bind up and possible kickback. So now I'm ready to start with one of my side pieces and make that dado cut. Let me see if I can show you how we're going to join this side to the top, because you can't really see it with all our moldings in place. What we're going to do is put a rabbet in the top piece, and that'll sit over the side pieces like that. And we'll do that operation on the table saw also. Again, using the dado head, and I've set it up so that it'll remove 3/4 inch by 3/8 inch. And I'll do that to both ends of my top piece. Now, the back of the bookcase has this 1/4 inch plywood, which is recessed into the side panels. And the reason for that is that when you look at the end of the bookcase, you don't want to see the edge grain of that plywood. So what we have to do is make a rabbet joint in the side panels which will be 3/8 by 3/8, and I'll do that over on the table saw. Now, I don't need the T-square anymore, but I've put this piece of wood on the rip fence to protect my blade from hitting the metal. Our adjustable shelves are held in place by these shelf standards and clips. And I suppose we could just mount these standards right on the surface like this. But for a couple minutes extra work, by cutting 2 dados, they'll be recessed and it'll give you that nice clean look. Okay, the next objective is to join all the pieces together using glue and screws. Okay, with some glue in the dado, I'm ready to install the bottom piece. And I want to keep it about 3/4 of an inch in front of that side panel to take into account the thickness of the face frame. Okay, the next thing that I have to do is cut this piece of 1/4 inch plywood to fit on the back. Okay, with a light bead of glue applied all the way around the back, we're ready for the plywood. And you want to make sure that this bad side is facing up and the good side is down towards the inside of the cabinet. Just set it down in place. And I'll fasten it with these little 5-penny box nails. Okay, with the back all nailed in place, tip it up and clean off any excess glue that might have squeezed through with a damp sponge. And then I'm ready to start building my face frame. Now let me show you how this face frame assembly goes together. But first I'll take off this crown molding header piece, and I can pull off this frame. And you can see it's just 3 pieces of wood, 2 stiles, 1 on each side, and a rail piece across the top. And they're joined together with a half-lap joint that's glued and screwed together from the back side. Now let's start over here with our pieces for our bookcase. This is the header piece, 3 feet long, 4 3/4 inches wide. And I've set up the radial arm saw with the dado cutter in it to remove just enough material to make the half-lap joint. Bit of glue here for our half-lap joint, and we'll slip them together and make sure they're aligned, and just use some small 5/8 inch long screws, really just to hold it in place until the glue sets up. Okay, with some glue applied all the way around the edges of the plywood, I'm ready to put my assembled face frame on. Set that down in the glue. And I'll just use some 6-penny finish nails to attach it all the way around the edges. All right, let's work on the base next. Now, I suppose I could glue and nail all these pieces right to the cabinet, but if you were going to build one or more of these and join them together, to move them around, you have to be able to take them apart. So you want to have the base piece as well as the head piece removable. Now this is just pine, and I've put a beaded edge along the top of our base just using my router with this beading bit. And then I fitted all the pieces with 45-degree miters on the corners, and then added these glue blocks to the inside with screws to hold everything together so it's nice and rigid. Now I've got a piece clamped down to my table here, 5 inches wide and about 6 feet long, and that's what I'll need to put the base on our bookcase. All right, now I'm going to do my mitering right here on the table saw using my T-square, but first I'm going to rough cut the pieces with enough extra to do my final fitting. So I need 2 pieces, 14 inches, and the piece left over will do the front. I'm going to bring the pieces right over to the case and mark the orientation of my angles. And that's just so that I don't get confused, because whenever you do mitering, it's very easy to cut the angle the wrong way. So I'll come back to my saw, adjust the blade to 45 degrees for the miter cuts, and then we're ready to make the pass. Let's begin to fit these pieces together. We'll check the front piece against the side piece, and that fits really well. So now we're going to hold it firmly in place, go across to the other side, and just put a little pencil mark where we want the miter to be. It's a good idea to have that just a little bit long, because you can always recut it later. And then also mark the orientation of the angle. Now to make this miter cut, my mark is really on the wrong side of the board. It's over here and the blade is here. So I'll flip it over, and using a square, just transfer a mark along the back of the board, marking it on this side, and that'll give me a guide to start through the saw blade. And again, I'm going to cut it a little long because I can always trim it up later. Before I can make my final check of the fit, I have to cut my side pieces to length. So I'll just set the front piece on the cabinet, then take the side pieces, putting the mitered edge down, and mark this intersection right here, which will give me the correct length, and I'll just square cut those. And now I'm ready to see how well these fit together. Okay, that fits pretty good. Now I'm ready to glue it up. These glue blocks really do a great job at strengthening those corners. So some glue on the block itself. Set it down on our side piece. And then some glue on the entire miter, and a little more on the block. And I can fasten it to this front piece. Okay, a few screws, and that'll hold the base in place. Now, the top section of our bookcase may look complicated, but in fact it's not that bad. It's 3 pieces of wood, a 3 5/8 inch crown molding that I picked up at the lumber yard, this angled piece right here that I made on the table saw, and a piece of 1x5 that I've rounded over the edges. Now the bottom edge was rounded over with a 1/2 inch rounding over bit in the router, and to make it a little bit softer on the top edge, I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch rounding over bit, and I'm ready to do that now.
This little guide allows me to make perfect blind screw pockets every time. Now this top assembly gets fastened to the cabinet with screws. Okay, that takes care of the backer strip for the crown molding. And that was just made from a piece of 1 7/8" stock that I beveled at 38 degrees. And what it'll do is accept the crown molding, and in fact we'll fasten it to that strip. That 38 degrees, though, will vary depending on where you purchase your molding. And now our crown molding, the final touch. Not the easiest thing to cut and make nice, tight joints. First of all, you need a miter box. Not necessarily a power one like this, but you do need a miter box. And you always set the molding in upside down. What I like to do is simulate what's happening at the cabinet, because the molding, if it's not set in the box correctly, will end up at the wrong angle, and that will drastically affect your fits. So we'll use a piece of scrap backer and set the molding against it, and then clamp this guide strip down. And that'll simulate what's happening at the cabinet, and we'll end up with perfect cuts every time. What do we ever do without this carpenter's glue? A little bit of glue on the joint, and I've already put some on my cleat. Squeeze it into place. That fits real good. And nail it in place with some small 4-penny finish nails. And now for probably the most important part of our bookcases, the shelves themselves. Let me show you how I made those. We started out with these pieces of plywood, and this would be the front edge if we left it unfinished, and that's not very good. So I took some 1x2 pine, and we'll apply that to the front. It'll give it some thickness, and it'll also give it some strength. And what I did is just rounded off the edges using a 3/8 rounding over bit. Let me show you. A little bit of glue, my milled front piece, put on with some 4-penny finish nails, and that's all there is to making shelves. Let me share a trade secret with you. Whenever I build these bookcases, I don't want to install these metal standards until after I've done any painting or staining to the inside of the cabinet. Believe me, it's real difficult to paint around them. But once the paint is dry and the standards are in place, set those shelves in and you're ready to start enjoying your bookcases.